My name is Scott Hunsucker.
And you're a cave diver?
Yes, for many, many years. I'm on a slight hiatus for now. I'll return at some point, I think. I haven't quite gotten there yet, though. Death by catfish in Lake of the Ozarks in Arkansas. I learned to dive when I was 15 years old. I was in a high adventure explorer scout group kind of thing, and rock climbing and skiing and all that. And I had lived my life in Florida up until moving to Missouri and joined this high adventure post, and we went to learn scuba dive, and I went to the local pool, and the very first event they threw you in the deep end and pulled your mask off. So to the surface I go, But we went to Lake of the Ozarks. Back in those days, wetsuits were not lined. You had to wear pantyhose. So as a 15-year-old kid in Missouri, I was wearing pantyhose, rocking those. Put on these old beaver skin wetsuits, beaver tail wetsuits, and the jaws had come out, and I was checking my swimming pools for sharks and terrified like all young people were then. And we're swimming around in this low visibility lake. They flooded a valley, and my partner pointed to a hole. He wanted me to stick my head in it. Sure, I stuck my head in it, and out comes this giant catfish that I immediately thought was Jaws. Started convinced I was going to die. That was my first real scuba memory that sticks out in my head. Moved to North Carolina, eventually moved back to Florida, and I didn't really start diving until I moved back to Florida in 1991, I think it was. Insatiable curiosity. I roam, I am nomadic, I always want to know what's around the next corner, and it was very appealing to my adventurous sense to go into the unknown. Jenny Springs for me at that point was unknown. Just to see what was around the next corner, and it was the next level of diving, if you will. I was an instructor at that time. I was teaching for dive pros here in Pensacola, and I thought I had mastered buoyancy and thought I was good in the water, and took my first cavern course and learned that was not the case, and then honed the skill. But just the exploration aspect, it's fascinating to me. 1994, maybe 95, somewhere in the mid 90s, my best friend, he's since died, but not cave related, but Bill was his name, Bill Cowan. We were friends from paramedic school way back in the early 90s, and we dove in the ocean all the time. He lived in Gainesville at one point and was aware of cave country, and heard of Peacock and Little River and all these places. And so we started grabbing everything we could get. We bought the CDS manual and read that, and read Sheck's books, and read everything we could get our hands on, and decided we were going to go to Gainesville and take a cavern course. I did not know cave existed outside of cave country. I had no idea. It's an hour and a half east of where we're sitting now. There's cave. Hard to get to, but there's cave. I had no idea that existed. So then we were going to go down there, start the adventure, I guess you could say. Then it was cavern, so it was with NSS CDS and the NACD. It was cavern, intro to cave, and full cave. Lloyd Bailey was our instructor for all three classes. Taken over a period of time. It was always recommended to have a number of dives in between, and not like the accelerated nature that it has kind of become. At least the last time I looked at it, there were guys going from cavern to rebreathers in 6 months. I don't think that's a grand idea. There's a very high price to pay in cave diving if things go wrong, and I think foundational experience is everything. Being able to keep the head in the game is what makes the difference in life and death. And if you go too fast, you pay a price. So I think you have to have a little background before the rescue. This cave, Ward and I want to say greater than 5 years. Ward and I did decades of exploration in Mariana. We still have cave that even Ed hasn't found. That is not an invitation to go hunt. We still have some cave hidden. I mean, we trespassed. We've been shot at. We would paddle up in places in the middle of the night. We would drive through farmers' fields in the middle of the night. We would make ramps to drive over irrigation pipes. We lived for exploration in Mariana. and I loved every minute of it. We would, pop up in unknown sinkholes looking around, and we would shine lights in guys' living rooms that lived on them. And yeah, the guy lived on the house. So we connected a lot of cave systems together in Mariana. We'd come in from a river, and we would, over a series of dives and laying line, we would come across other line. And, it's kind of weird when you're exploring from cave A and you come across the end of line at cave B. And you're like, how the hell does this happen? And then you go off, and then we popped up in a sink one day about 2:00 in the morning. And we would do that kind of regularly and had no idea where we were. We were just out in the middle of a field. We parked way over there in a field and a grove of trees, and we popped up, and we were looking around, and I fully turn around, and what I thought was a bright light at the time, American Underwater Lighting, AUL, the originals, and I shine it in this guy's living room. I'm like, oh God, go. And we blister back down into the sink to get away from it. The guy, I'm sure, was asleep, but we had been investigated and chased off in the area before, and the last thing I wanted to do was call attention to the fact that I'm still diving in their fields, even though they don't really want me there. But there's a lot of, I don't recommend trespassing. I really don't. Guys draw guns on you. I've been shot at, ran off a few times, but man, we saw some cool ass cave. But we looked for this cave for a long time. Part-time, we looked for a long time. The only reason we looked for it, we heard that Wes Skiles had shot video and heard it was beautiful. And I'm thinking, well, if Wes shot video, this has got to be a nice cave. We really got to find this thing. We looked, never could find it. We were in the area, but we never could find it. And then a friend of mine used to be a photographer for National Geographic. So we were at Madison's Steakhouse. It was a standby institution in Mariana cave diving back in those days. And we were talking, and he had a little information, and we had a little information. So we left, and we went, and we hunted, and I'll be damned if we didn't find this little pig trail that led down to this little dry cave, and in the back of the dry cave was this gorgeous, I thought, blue cave water. The culmination of years of effort has now been realized. We have found what we've been looking for. So we hurriedly came back the next day. We geared up. We had to displace about 5,000 bats temporarily, which was odd. Most of our caves are wet from the mouth. This was a sump, dry cave with a wet cave in the back. And Ward and I are on our way down there, and we're slipping and sliding in bat guana, and it's just a bloody unpleasant experience. It really is. There's a layer of bat guana over the water, and horrible. So, but we're going to go. We've looked forever. We're going to do this dive. You could see the line through the basin, so I knew it was real. So we drop in through the back guana, and we finally get into clean water, and we get to the line, and off we go to the right-hand side. Just as excited as we could possibly be. And it was the most nondescript, boring, ugly, shallow pit I've ever been in. It just was not a pleasant spot, right? It was terrible. It wasn't very long, and all of this work and all of these years, there's got to be more. We come back to the basin, and we'd heard there was a deep section. Take that relatively. There was a line dropping down through a hole in the floor. So, this is it. This is what we came here for. Yeah, no. We dropped down and ducked under, and we swam for a bit. And while it looked prettier than the right-hand side did, it was not worth the effort. It really wasn't. Looking at every crack, looking behind every rock, I popped my head up in an air pocket, and I saw, bat guana and bats flying around because it's really shallow. Didn't think anything of that at the time. Looked, and man, there's nothing here. And this was, a waste of years of our life. We come back to the basin, and I look up, and now there's another layer of bat guana across the water, and I'm like, man, we got to go back through this, and we got to crawl out all this bat stuff. It's terrible. We ended up calling it Bat Colon Cave, just because I felt like I'd crawled up the colon of a bat the whole time, and I swore I would never return. That was my one shot. This is done. We were lied to. This was not a good adventure, and I'm not coming back here. There's enough cave in Mariana. I'm not coming back. And for a lot of years, I did all of the body recoveries in Mariana. I've been on the IUCRR, the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery Group, for many years, and I have been in 911 for now coming up on 32 years. So at that time, I'd been in 911 for a decade. I'd seen death and bodies. It's just work. It's just another day. I'd done body recoveries in the ocean, bays, lakes, rivers. It was just a skill that I had that would bring closure to families and keep people that weren't used to dealing with death from having to go, do something they didn't really want to do. So I did a lot of it. And would drive over to Mariana. Been to Vortex a few times. I told, divers out of Jackson Blue. The sheriff called. Johnny McDaniels, I think was his last name. Johnny Mac. Anyway, he called and said, hey, we have another body recovery. I need you to, come over and I'm thinking, hole in the wall, Twin, Jackson, any number of possible caves. And I asked where it was, and he said it's in this little small place behind a cemetery down by the railroad tracks. And I dropped my head because they just described Bat Colon Cave, this place I had just been to after years of effort, swore I would never return, and now I have to go back to Bat Colon Cave. And mind you, I also had the stomach flu, so I was sick as sick could be. I felt terrible, but I gathered up the gear. I called a buddy of mine that worked here at the dive shop that was also a cave diver, just because I really didn't want to go do this by myself. And off we went. His name was Dan Nieves. Off we went to Mariana to do this dive. And I get there a couple hours later. It's a 2-hour drive for me from here. And they said about 2 hours before you got here, the visibility got destroyed, that it was crystal blue and it got destroyed. And it's very shallow. So I'm thinking, yeah, he seized and died in the silt and floundered around down there, and he mucked up the visibility, and I'm gonna go, do a body recovery. The Jackson County Fire was there, EMS, the Sheriff's Department, news people. What was a little pig trail, they had now chainsaw cut, and you could drive a van down to the thing. They had lights inside this cavern. It looks nothing like when Lord and I were there weeks ago. Dan and I entered the water. I'd actually talked to the paramedic that was there, the paramedic here, and she said she had full plans of working this guy. We're gonna do, cardiac arrest protocol and start CPR. And I'm like, he's been underwater for 6 hours. This guy is as dead can possibly be. You do you, but he's really, really dead. So we enter the water. We go off to the right, a little short section, and Viz got better. So I knew he wasn't there, but we went to the end of the line just to confirm. Looked in every nook and every cranny that I knew existed. We came back to the basin. Then we drop into the deep section. I'm in front and Dan is behind me, and I went to the air pocket. I just ended up going to the air pocket, and I surfaced in the air pocket, and about 2.5 feet away, we come face to face. I pop up and he looks at me and goes, hey, are you looking for a dead man? I scared the bejesus out of me, if you will. I spit my regulator out. I had the line in my hand, and I backed up trying to get away from this guy because he's supposed to be dead, and now he's talking to me, and it took me a minute to process what was happening. It turned out he had 127 pounds of air when he and his partner had gotten separated, and he had found that air pocket. So he turned around and went back to that air pocket while his partner went to the end of the line, got lost, and eventually came out. A little backstory on those four. They came over from Mississippi, and they liked to do crazy, adventurous things to see how close to death they could get. Their words, not mine. We want to see how close to death we can get. 127 pounds in aluminum 80 is pretty close to death. So no cave diving, no training, barely open water certified, should never have been there. How they found this cave that I looked for years for, and they stumbled across it with a bunch of aluminum 80s and a bunch of gear. They had an old Neutralite. One of the original Divrite lights was a big aluminum cased rectangle. And then it went to polymer, but it was a big aluminum case brick, And they stuck it in the basin, and they put the head in, pointing light, and they took some Siloom sticks and they stuck it in the silt. They went off. They had 2 guys on the surface, 2 guys in the water in case they got in trouble. He surfaced in that air pocket and actually got out of the water and crawled up on a mound of bat guana in total darkness, convinced that someone would come and get him. And he hung out in this air pocket. The only reason he's still alive is it had a crack to the surface. Bats came and went out of this thing, or he would have been, he would have died of CO2. So yeah, he was in the wrong cave at the right time, I guess. And he crawled up in this thing, and I pop up 2.5 feet away, and he tells me the whole looking for a dead guy. Adrenaline dump was pretty impressive. And then the funniest part, Dan pops up right behind me, and I'm like, Dan, this is Mark. Mark, this is Dan. And his eyes were as big as, he was like, what in the, he had never done any of this. He was just coming along to help me out. He was expecting to have his first body, and here he is with a living guy. So we did the whole, this is how we're going to exit, what we're going to do. And Dan went in front. He had no air in his tank and buoyant as a fishing cork, I guess. And I put him on my long hose, and we started the exit. And we get back to the basin. Dan surfaced and got out of the way. And as I raised my head, just about to vomit, just sick as I could possibly be, I look up, and there's a dozen people standing there looking at me. And this guy and his friends, the paramedic, fire department, police, all these people are in this cavern. And I'm looking up at them, and he's laying down, and they think once again I've pulled another dead guy out of the cave. And I grabbed him by his regulator, or his tank valve, and I stood him up. And I remember saying, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mark Orr. And I stood him up, and he spit his my regulator out, and everybody applauded. The adrenaline flow blew my fins off. I just collapsed into the water. It was an unexpected emotional event to find a guy. I even told the paramedic, he's going to be dead. He's been underwater for 6 hours. He's going to be dead. I was quite wrong. His name was Mark Orr, and he lives in Mississippi. I talked to him once or twice many years ago. We did an interview on CNN right after it happened, and I think I talked to him maybe 1 year after that. We spoke on the phone for a bit. But yeah, that was an unexpected good event. Much rather do that than no bodies.
Would you do it again?
Yeah, I would. If they called upon it. I don't know if the circumstances would line up, and I'm certainly not in the headspace I would need to be diving to pull that off. I've seen some of the heads videos, and man, they're impressive. They really are. Cave diving is a very mental thing. It is, oddly enough, one of the only places on the planet, the only thing I think about is what I'm doing. I go in burning buildings for a living. I'm a professional fireman. I go places people just don't want to go, and I find it macabre and incredibly sexy, and it's a great time. But even doing that, I'm thinking of other things. But cave diving, it is my universal zen. My mind is solely on that cave, and yeah, it's wonderful. So get back into diving and get honed back up. Opportunity presents itself, I'd probably do it again. So for many years, Jackson Blue was a diving spot. I have some of Sheck Hexley's original maps and his survey notes, which are pretty cool to read, of the original exploration in Jackson Blue. I didn't know it existed. Like I said earlier, I thought all cave was cave country, and then I just had to drive from here, 4.5, 5 hours away to go cave diving. And it was at a CDS conference, I think, or an NACD conference, one of the two. I went to both every year. Bill and I went to both every year anyway. And I remember a video of a guy swimming through the cavern at Jackson Blue, and the white walls and those big boulders on the way in, and it was stunning. It was beautiful. I inquired about it, found out we actually dove it for a little bit, and then they closed it shortly after I started diving at Jackson Blue. The local politicians, for whatever reason, they decided to close it. They blamed cave divers for destroying the bathrooms and litter and leaving beer cans everywhere. But there's no security at that place at that time. Anybody that wanted to could jump the fence and go down there. And so I got involved, and I started calling the county commissioners, and would actually drive over there and attend meetings, and somehow became the voice for reopening cave diving in Mariana. They even went so far, they wanted to shut down all cave diving in Jackson County, and they wanted a permit system where you'd have to pay like $300 a year, and you'd have a little sticker on your car. I convinced them that was a horrible idea, because then you'd be marking an otherwise nondescript vehicle that, hey, I got a bunch of money in here for cave diving stuff. And a lot of meetings, a lot of newspaper interviews, a lot of people signing petitions, a lot of talk, and they agreed to a dive fee system for Jackson Blue alone. We used to have to go to the sheriff's department and sign in when they weren't, taking calls. I want to say it was $30 at that time, and then they would give you we actually had a key made, an unduplicatable key. I was trying to appease them with high security and all that nonsense. And then you could go and dive. Then when you were done, you would have to check out. We still had all the regular diving, in Mariana that was available. But Jackson Blue, I guess the crown jewel, you could say, or at least the most known cave in Mariana, was closed for quite a while. But just persistence and wanting to dive somewhere closer to home than cave country. And honestly, Jackson is a gorgeous cave. It's unfortunately seen a lot of damage in the last handful of years from these accelerated, cavern to rebreather and 6-month people. But it's a beautiful cave. That time frame in my life sort of opened up everything in cave diving. Getting Jackson Blue opened again caught attention of George Irvine, the then director of the Woodville Karst plane, and he sent an invitation. I mean, this is the the creme de la creme, the holy grail of cave diving, especially in the early to mid 90s. George Irvine sends you an email, and I'm like all giddy and freaking out. You had to be invited, and then you had to have a sponsor. So we were invited to go to Tallahassee, and I remember going my very first trip to Wakulla State Park. And I mean, I had seen every video, I had read every book, I knew who these players were, but I'd never met them. And we're kind of lost, roaming around, and we turn into Wakulla, and there's a truck in front of me, and I've never seen more cave cylinders, more bottles in one truck in my life. There's a little bitty Nissan, it turned out to be Wayne Head. And there must have been 50 freaking bottles in the back of this thing. And to me, it was a kid in a candy store. This was as good as it's going to get. I'm at Wakulla. This is going to be something. It was a great time for a long time. Some of the caves in Tallahassee are beyond description. They're absolutely beautiful. They're so far wide apart you can't see the opposite wall. You're 260 on the ceiling and you can barely see the floor, and boulders the size of houses. It's incredible. It is incredible. But it got really political, and I tend to not be able to hold my tongue when things get political and strong-willed and opinionated, but often quiet. Wasn't really quiet. Things kind of went south, and that chapter closed. Yeah. Okay. But it was a good time. Did a lot of exploration, had a couple of close calls, and met some really good guys. It was a good time. My all-time favorite cave is Hole in the Wall. We did a lot of exploration in Hole in the Wall. Some of Sheck's original notes. When we went back, years ago, and found the beautiful white wall, blue water section, 3 T's back. It has a name. It eludes me.
The
Constellation Corridor. I absolutely love Constellation Corridor. And, nobody dove that thing forever. The visibility had been shot. And there are a few caves that we've dove in, and the viz is crap. And then you turn a corner. M2 Blue is one of those caves. Brett Hemphill took me to took Ward Knot M2 Blue one day. And I'm about to call it. I mean, this dive is just crap. But this is Brett. He's a fucking legend in cave diving. The man knows what he's talking about, rest his soul. So we kept swimming, and we turned a corner, and I'm like, oh my God, it's a huge bore tunnel, white wall, blue water, yeah. So Constellation Corridor was my carrot that they dangled in front. So we did a lot more exploration there, connected a bunch of those tunnels, added a bunch of those tunnels, but to go from that nasty brown ugliness to that white wall, blue water, 2 degrees colder, I love Hole in the Wall. I really do. But probably my favorite dive, just single dive, Indian. Yeah, downstream Indian. Man, that's just power cave and tunnel. I don't mind swimming, but I love to motor. and I just click and just, and Indian is drop into power room, McCullough room. I love when the floor falls away. My favorite thing to do is to go through a hole in the floor and pop out in the ceiling of another great room below you. I love being upside down and crawling through some tiny hole like a inverted turtle, and I pop out and there's just this expanse below me. Still love that. Yeah, so Indian is probably my all-time favorite. I mean, there's sections of other caves that were gorgeous, but yeah, I'd go back to Indian right now. So Indian was something else. Did we'll call it out to 45, and did Prominence, Go Between, Cheryl, Emerald, a couple others I won't mention. Yeah, I dove in Woodville Karst until the change of leadership. We'll just leave it at that. When George left, I took Jerry Moore, longtime support diver who had never been to Indian. I took Jerry to Indian, and I got in trouble for it. Shouldn't have. The guy had been a support diver for years. You're a support diver, you work, you grunt, you drag all this stuff. The reward is diving on Sunday. I took Jerry and a few others to Indian and had a few words to say with the new director, and my time in the Woodville Karst plane came to an end. Okay. But yeah, beautiful cave. I don't hold anything against them. It wasn't going to work anymore anyway. Yeah.
I was lucky enough to be able to do it before closed again.
Yeah, closed. It's something else. I didn't like it in the summer too much because you'd come back out in that 80-degree water and wreck your decompression profiles, but it felt bad. But wintertime or any other, man, it's just a beautiful cave. And there's beautiful tunnel. There's a beautiful tunnel in Wakulla. It's just, I'll remember that forever.
Right time, right visibility.
Yeah, right time, right visibility. I remember sitting at 190 looking up and seeing the boats go across. The viz being that good. You could see a bird fly over your head. You're still going to be in the water for hours because you've been underwater for hours. And matter of fact, my first time eating underwater was at Wakulla. We would take camel packs, with Gatorade. We use those for hydration, bananas and protein bars. And we used to take paperback books. We'd read those, but I was hungry as a Wakulla dive, and I'd taken bananas and all that, and I didn't think about it. So I peel my banana, I'm getting ready. We're in deco for a couple hours. I'm getting ready to eat, and I pop my regulator out, and I stick my banana in my mouth. Man, this thing spit the water out. This thing tastes good. I'm chewing, and I have to breathe. I'm like, oh shit, I got a mouthful of banana. So because I bit too much, so I packed the banana in my cheek like a chipmunk, and I open my mouth, the water comes in, I put the regulator in, I spit the water out, take a breath, reverse it, spit the water out. And I took much smaller bites of bananas and protein bars after that. But yeah, Wakulla's a good cave. I hate that diving is not available to everyone there, but Wakulla is a special place. Cool. Get there early in the morning, before they open, and we'd shine lights across the basin. You'd see all those orange eyes looking back out at you from the alligators. And we're getting in that. But yeah, it was honestly good times. Great friends, great diving, good exploration. It was a good time. A bit. I talked to a few old friends. I talked to Ward, but occasionally if I'm coming through Mariana or shoot a text Ed, but I don't really have knowledge of current state. Before I left is when all of the people started throwing their MX cards at it, and they were accelerating far too quickly. And now, we did exploration, 5 and 6 stage bottles out, and it took setup dives, and it took weeks. And I mean, it was at the edge of what we were able to do, Ward and I as a 2-man team. And now guys are walking to it on dive 1 on a rebreather. So while that is fascinating, and my generation coming up, we replaced the Pat Watsons and the Paul DeLoaches and all these guys and Shaq Exleys that explored all through Mariana with terrible lighting and terrible performing regulators and wetsuits for some bloody reason. So I understand technology and I understand progress, but there are places that I really think you need to have that foundational support of the basics. my profession, firefighting. You can't go from getting out of rookie school into some, 5-alarm commercial thing and be in charge of it. You can't. It takes time. And I think cave diving is one of those opportunities, one of those recreational events that has a very high price for failure. And if you go too fast, you end up in a spot you really don't want to be in. And there are a handful of living cave rescues and hundreds and hundreds of cave fatalities. So take your time. I think we're going to, just in the last handful of years, we've pushed further in caves than I ever thought were possible. I heard rumors of this section in Jackson Blue that Kevin Leonhardt and Ed Sorensen and others had found, and Ward and I had scratched on the surface in that region hunting and looking, but we never made the connection. And I think a lot of that is still around the corner. I think there's a lot of opportunity in known systems to lay a lot more line. We laid a lot of line in caves that people dove on a regular basis just because we were persistent and we were patient and we read the cave and got lucky, And I think as technology continues to advance, safety systems continue to improve, people will push that envelope further and further. And I think it won't be as easy as it has been in the past, but I think there's a lot of exploration left.
Awesome.
We'll see. In Mariana, didn't exist. Okay. We had carte blanche to that entire region. An old friend of mine, a guy named Wade Webb, sort of introduced me to cave diving in Mariana, and Wade had a boat, a 16-foot fiberglass stump knocker. Man, we wore that boat out. He would loan us his boat, which was great because you needed a boat to dive in the Chipola River, to go anywhere. You needed a boat, canoes, and he had all that stuff. He would loan it to us, and he would even take us to caves that he had dove in, but different lights, different techniques, and all of that. He'd come to our hotel at night, and Ward and I would be sitting at the foot between our two beds, knotting line, and Wade would show up, and we're in here, just boxes of line, and we're knotting line, and he knew where we went. And you guys found cave? Oh God, yeah, we did. Look at we'd hold up empty reels, and we're just knotting and knotting line. So there was no one. And then a guy named Ed Sorensen decided to move to Mariana. And I'm not gonna lie, I was butthurt. I really was. We had this whole thing to ourselves when nobody was around. Everybody was diving Jackson Blue, but Ward and I were out in farmers' fields. We were doing all kinds of stuff. And then Ed shows up. And I didn't like Ed for a long time. I didn't like Ed. And one day I had a gas problem and I needed air. The only dive shop at that time was either in Atmore? Dothan. There was a dive shop in Dothan.
Mm-hmm. Dothan, yeah.
We went there, and the guy would not fill our tanks. He wouldn't cave fill them to 33. And he sees 2,400 on it, and I'm talking to him. Oh, these are in bar? Yeah, man, they're in bar. You fill all you want, my friend. Just give me 33. We'll call it even, So, yeah, he thought these tanks would hold 2,400 bar. So we would bring everything from here. I'd go to the dive shop. I'd pump for days. We'd go to Mariana with 6 sets of doubles and 15 stage bottles. And, we would dive 2-3 times a day. And then Ed shows up, and then I have to swallow my pride and motor my butt back across the mill pond and go talk to Stacy. And, Ed he's a great guy. He'd give you the shirt off his back. He's as friendly as he could be, but I guess I was butthurt that I had a competition, who's far eclipsed, everything we did in Mariana. So there was none. It was a good time. It was a really, really good time to be exploring in Mariana.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, we went to close call, a few, I guess. We went to dive this undisclosed location in Tallahassee. I don't give away cave locations. Even though I'm not diving, I still don't, hey, you need to go here. We were diving and we were set for 300 foot. You know, we were going to go do some exploration. And we had everything with us. And we were wiggling through this sink to get down to the cave. And they had gone in front. And I didn't know it at the time, but I learned it later. There was a dividing wall. He went left and I accidentally went right. So when I wiggled and completely went through, I dropped through the ceiling and popped out into a room with no line and no survey and no idea where the hell I'm at. I didn't run a line from the surface like an idiot. So now I have no idea where I'm at and how to get there. And it was a tiny little hole in the ceiling and about a 15-foot horizontal and another tiny little hole. And it was a brief couple of moments of crap, I really screwed up. You know, I got more gas than anybody. I could stay down there for quite a while, but that one caught my attention for a bit. And then Ward and I were doing some exploration and big, beautiful cave, white walls, blue water, just the stuff you dream about. I mean, we were laying line on scooters, which was hard to do in Mariana because most of the stuff, the big passage was gone. And I mean, we were just, you know, blistering line out there. And I got to this point and all I saw was this little hole in the floor. I was so focused on dumping the last of this reel. I had it in my hand and I squeezed through what was an incredibly tight passage, which should have caught my attention because everything else we'd been in had been bloody huge, and I am fighting my way through this tiny little passage. And I get through and immediately turn around and realized I'd made a massive mistake. The line had been pulled into a line trap, and you know, it took me 5 minutes to squeeze through this thing. How long is it going to take me to get back out of it? And I allowed myself 2 breaths of panic, if you will, you know, 2 huge breaths that this is not a good place to be in. And I fought my way, and I was grinding, and you know, the regulator was pushing out of my mouth, the mask was pushing off of my head, but I had to go where the line went. I was going through this tunnel because Ward is on the other side, exit is on the other side, and I fought and pushed, and I was following the line up, and I actually ran into Ward's hand. And I am man enough to admit I held a grown man's hand for about 3 minutes because I had finally realized, okay, I've negotiated this restriction, I've gotten my way out of it. So I held his hand for a minute, and we came out, and he laughed and pointed about 10 feet to the left. That big going massive trunk passage was there, and I missed the whole thing. So we went around it, and I looked up, and there's that little line I ran through and that nasty restriction, and I shook my head in disbelief. I got too focused on what I was trying to do and not where I was going. And I guess the last close call involving my demise or potential demise was the anal extraction tunnel. I didn't name it that, but it's named the anal extraction tunnel. It's 1,200 feet long, and it is absolutely unpleasant. It is just unpleasant. Ward and I've done exploration. Ward is the biggest silt monster. I love the man. We've dove together for years, but he is the biggest silt monster I've ever met in my life. If you ever want to know where Ward is, just find the siltiest area of the cave and go through the silt. Ward be on the other side of the silt. I've done 1,200 foot silted out line drills, you know, diving with Ward. But the anal extraction tunnel, we were in another 300 foot dive in Tally, and I was out of 190 gas. I was out of 120 gas. Things had gone a little south. I was breathing 300 foot gas at 70 feet, and all I had was a 70 foot bottle on the other side. Everything else was empty, and my choice was 1,200 feet of the anal extraction tunnel on 300 foot gas, which I'm running low on, or I negotiate a tight side mount restriction and back mount. And I managed to negotiate a tight side mount restriction and back out because I could see my 70 foot bottle. I could lay on my belly and I could see it. It was right there, and it was that indomitable will to live, that I'm not going to die in this cave. And I got to that, and Ward and I were doing exploration at the end of another cave off the Chipola River. We used to do this idiotic thing of recalculating thirds on the way out to check for leads. So we would spend, a couple hours in the water, and on the way out, we'd just say, we're 1,000 feet from the entrance. Let's just do more, do more, and do more. Yeah, that's a horrible idea. I don't recommend that at all. So we were checking for leads, and we didn't find any. We were off the line a little bit, and I went to move forward. Silt was already destroyed. The viz was gone, and Ward lost the line. And I didn't realize it. So I got out of this restriction, and I turned, and their silt was just gone. So I proceeded forward thinking maybe he's out. Ward didn't come out. Ward didn't come out. And I thought maybe he came out, went the wrong way. So I went back into the cave. And I swam in zero visibility on the line until I came to a line marker, 500-600 feet. And I found a line arrow, and it was pointed out. And this whole time I'm thinking he had just got married. I'm like, what the hell am I going to tell Cynthia? I killed her husband. We've been diving for years, and my idiot mistake, kicking the line out of his hand. And now Ward has lost the line, and I can't find Ward. I don't know where he is. So I get to the line arrow, and I thought, well, if he came here and he went past it, he's an idiot. It's time for me to go. We're running low. And I turn around and start heading back. And little did I know, Ward had gone to the top of this little alcove area, found about 6 inches of visibility, tied a safety reel onto a little nub of a rock, and proceeded to do a line search in zero viz. Found the main line. He tied the line around it. So now he's on his way out because he thinks, I'm on my way out. We're all running low. So I turned around and I came back, and I found Ward's reel. So now I know Ward's alive, and he's somewhere between this reel and the entrance. You couldn't see anyway, so I turned on the afterburners and I just started swimming. Hell bent, I'm going to find Ward. I was swimming, I could hear him. I couldn't really stop in time, and I slammed into him on top of him and tackled him in the water, and we group hugged for a minute, if you will, and went on about our way. In hindsight, were any of them really going to take me out? No. But prior to all of it, and this is one of the things I had read I'd wanted to discuss, and this is part of that hurrying up thing I'm now totally against. My best friend Bill and I, like I said earlier in the interview, we'd read all these manuals. We'd already decided we were going to get cave certified. I called the caretaker of Morrison Blue one night. Used to be able to camp there for free and dive there for free. It had a little shack, way back in the day. I called the guy and convinced him to let us dive there overnight, and we would pay him the next morning. And Bill and I dove there many, many, many times. So, but never at night. Big difference. So we go to Morrison Blue to dive, and we had a reel in my pocket, but we didn't tie in. Reel in my pocket. My God, it's Morrison. I've been here a bunch. And I remember how blue the water was, how white the rocks were. It was gorgeous. It was almost surreal, at that point in my diving career. We're swimming around, and there's no beginning, there's no end. It's just this huge chamber, and we're, swimming in modified flutter. We're doing all the things we're supposed to do, even using air management on a single aluminum 80, but no training, no reel, all these other bad things. And it got to the point it's time to leave. And with no daylight, you really don't know where the entrance is. And there's a little duck under that you don't see at Morrison. So we get back to this rope. This rope was tied on a rock. And I get to the rope, and I'm like, oh shit, there's no entrance. We're stuck. We're in here. So now we're swimming around thinking we did something wrong. We're checking. We're looking under every rock. And we're swimming and burning up time and getting quite low on air. And the thought, well, this is it. This is what it's going to be like to die in a cave. I haven't even started. I'm going to die in this bloody thing because I was an idiot, had a reel in my pocket, and I didn't do the number one rule of cave diving. So I come back and I kind of resign myself to the fact that this is it. And my buoyancy was nowhere near what it is now, obviously all these years later. And I was at that end of the rope, at the rock, and I dropped down, I guess, just enough, and I looked up and I could see the stars in the night sky because I dropped down below the duck under and I could see. So I grabbed Bill and drug him pretty quickly out back into open water, and we did our safety stop because I'd never been in decompression or anything at that point. It was all open water stuff. we spent a good 15 minutes just calming ourselves. But yeah. So even at the very beginning, breaking the rules almost ended it for me. So yeah, bad times. Bad times. Fun cave dive, you just need to be relaxed and not really focused on anything other than proper buoyancy and minding the cave and enjoying yourself. Exploration, that's a different beast because you're pushing off into unknown, and there's nobody's been there. The line's not already ran for you. You don't know breakdowns. There've been a few of those. They're kind of terrifying at times. And that, honestly, I think exploration is slow. We came about it slow. Matter of fact, my first exploration reel I made out of 3 other reels I pieced together, and we dove and dove and dove a lot. And then I think it's just time to do it right. It's just time and honestly luck. Finding a cave and finding a little glimmer that nobody else saw, looking at it from a different angle. That insatiable curiosity, looking for what no one else has seen prior to you. I think that's the key. Leave some for me though if I ever come back. So the plan is to return. My 20 plus year primary cave partner is a guy named Ward Beecher out of Houston, Texas. We have dove together for decades. I have more dives with Ward than anybody, and he is hounding me to return. My sole focus for the last several years has been work and chasing that bottom line, if you will, setting up retirement, not having to work again so I can go off and roam and be nomadic. But I miss it. I'm not going to lie. I think it needs to be a slow return. I've dove a handful of times in the last few years, and the mind is not quite there yet. Things start to go wrong, and the little voice in the back of your head says, you're 6,000 feet from the surface. What the hell are you doing? And I started gradually to get to exploration, and laying line and all those things we did all those years ago. And the body, I guess, still thinks I can just jump back in with 5-stage bottles and 3 scooters and go blistering into the unknown. No, not yet. Not really. It needs to be a gradual introduction. So I'll return at some point upon retirement.
Awesome.
Maybe not to exploration level, but I still like wet rock. I really do.
Well, thank you very much. You also mentioned you're a professional firefighter, so thanks for your service.
Greatest job in the world, except for
Happy
politicians.
retirement, and I'm really hoping to see you around the JB because that's where we usually spend most of our time.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can do some
of
diving
my
together.
arrows back in the very back you may not have found yet, but it's been far eclipsed now. Yeah, I would love to see the new stuff. I haven't yet, but maybe one of these days I'll get up there and I'm going to show me the new stuff.
Awesome.
It's good dive.
All right. Well, thank you very much for seeing us, man.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure
Thanks for driving
to
over.
interview.
Yeah.
Thanks.